Sure. Becky, maybe if we pull that half shut, because they are going to come up and use the nursery because they love laying around on that floor in that nursery. It is comfortable in there. Yeah. Oh, that's right. MJ and them are having music practice right now. We're going to read two passages in Proverbs before I go into the lesson of the night from the Old Testament in Genesis. Proverbs chapter 2 and Proverbs chapter 4. Proverbs 2 and Proverbs 4. I believe Brother Patrick McKinney has some knee injections and things tomorrow, or back or knee. I'm sorry, for his back, I believe. And then I know that Brother Kevin Nylander had his surgery today, and they're keeping him in the hospital tonight for observation. And so continue that. And I'm still praying for Charles for your back to be healed. I really want that to happen. And also for some of the folks that are home ill tonight, which is a couple of folks that's got a hold of Hope Trump for a week or two, but now Jessica Patton now is at home and not feeling well. So we'll remember these folks in prayer. Proverbs 2, follow along with me as we read verse 6 through 13. For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. He layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. A buckler is a more versatile, smaller shield, arm shield. He keepeth the paths of judgment and preserveth the way of his saints. Then shalt thou understand righteousness and judgment and equity, yea, every good path. When wisdom entereth into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaketh froward things, who leave the paths of righteousness to walk in the ways of darkness. So we hear the wisdom and understanding of the Lord gives equity and justice and wisdom and understanding. And then we see that that is compared to being in the light, compared to those that walk in unrighteousness in the ways of darkness. Look at Proverbs 4, verse 18. Proverbs 4, verse 18, another passage over. But the path of the just is as the shining light that shineth more and more into the perfect day. The way of the wicked is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble. I mentioned last week in Genesis, it says, Genesis 1, verse 5, and the evening and the morning were the first day. There was a creation, act of creation, and there was a designation of time, and the light time hours were called day, and the dark hours were called night. We can see now through the scriptures this is alluded to with the day of being in the light, in the way of righteousness, and the night being associated with the way of the unrighteous or evil, darkness. Most likely it's an easy symbolism because folks think in the dark, or should we use this blanket term, the cover of darkness, you can get away with more. That it's not the working hours of the day, it's the idle time, but it's also the time where less likely to be seen. You know, burglars don't wear blaze orange or reflective road gear. Burglars don't dress in white. They dress in black. Why? To be disguised or blend in with the darkness. Solomon wrote, "The just as a shining light, and the wicked as darkness." And though we should be reminded of this, there's no such thing as hiding or being a burglar with God. The cover of darkness doesn't work for him or with him. In Psalms 139, classic passage 1 verse 3, "O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my downsetting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways." We have already the expression that God knows when we are asleep or when we're laying down. "For there's not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether." Let's jump down to verse number 11. "If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee." So isn't that something that even David in the Psalms expresses? There's no under the cover of darkness with Christ. He knows when we're up. He knows when we're asleep. The passages I didn't read, he knows when we're near. He knows when we're in the farthest part of the sea. But also for folks to say, well, I'll do my operations and I'll do my nefarious deeds in the dark. He just said the day and the light and the dark are the same to him. You know, God's security lights are always on. So I'd come back to this, and we'll see in the scriptures that there are some good things that happen in the dark. The first we had was in the night hours was the Abrahamic covenant that God could, since he could swear by no greater, swear by himself, and made an oath with Abraham as he was in a deep sleep. God walked between the sacrifices and made the covenant sure. So it reminds me of the Bible passage that he would never leave us nor forsake us. Whether we're awake or asleep, we have God's presence. Now I'm coming back to the beginning part of Genesis, chapter 13, and it must be a significant story for several reasons. It's a dark story. It's very early in man's creative history. You wish it wasn't in there. You say, well, why is it so important? First of all, that so much attention's given to it. You know, like say in the size and scope of the Bible, what's written, that it have 2 predominant chapters given to it in the book of Genesis, origins. And if that's not enough weight, if it was 1 verse or 2 verses, let alone 2 chapters, how about this? It is the story in the comparative tense that will find its way in the prophecy of the New Testament in Matthew 24 and Luke 17 of how it will be in the last days. So it's significant to know what's taking place in these passages. Genesis 13, verse 10. And I've chosen to use parts of entire chapters, instead of just reading the whole chapter. I've just chosen to come into it in parts of it for the time. "And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah." Here's the conditions with 2 comparisons. Ready? "Even as the garden of the Lord." The valley of the Vale, where 5 predominant cities are, and 2 that we know significantly, Sodom and Gomorrah, must have been lush and full of vegetation. For they're compared to the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, particular region, as thou comest into Zoar. So there was a region in Egypt, and I believe that's where the Israelites were given, in that land between about the Nile. As you come into Zoar, people would say, "Boy, have you seen the fields of Zoar? Boy, have you seen the forest of Zoar? Have you seen what the crops can yield in Zoar?" So like Lot lifts up his eyes and sees the well-watered plains of Sodom and Gomorrah, like the Garden of Eden, like the fertile lands of Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves one from another. And Abraham dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. Beside verse 13, in a standalone verse, I wrote 18:20. 18:20. So I'll turn over there since it's mentioned here as a very introduction to the story and what takes place. In 18:20 it says this, "And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous." So for anybody that would want to excuse what we know so well about Sodom and Gomorrah is not a sin, not a vile transgression. The word grievous comes from a Hebrew word that expresses a sound of wailing or a hurtful sound. So whatever it is, the sin, it is a hurtful sound. It is grievous to be heard. And so we came to this passage because we're talking about the way of the righteous is a shining light in Proverbs, and the way of the unrighteous is as darkness. We can see as we come to this part, here is a major story that's going to be compared as it will be in the prophecies as the coming of the Lord. It will be a time of darkness. It will be a time of darkness that's exceeding hurtful sound up to the Lord. We'll find that it's a time of darkness where men's deeds are under the cover of the dark. In the story we have when blessings become a problem. I'm just going to touch on it. It could be a message by itself. We read back in this passage, I believe it's chapter 13, verse 2. We see that Abraham's become exceedingly, and Abraham was very rich in cattle and silver and gold. Abraham's prosperous. We can go down to verse 5. And Lot also, which went with Abraham, had flocks and herds and tents. Lot was prosperous. And then I believe it's in verse 7. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abraham's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. Do you remember the story of what the answer Daniel Boone gave when he wanted to leave Kentucky and go out more towards Missouri? Because even as a pioneer in Kentucky with just a few settlements, he said it was getting too crowded and he needed more elbow room. I mean, needed more elbow room. That adventuresome pioneer spirit. Well, here, Abraham's wealth, Lot's wealth, and the others who already dwelled there, they begin to contend for the water. They can begin to contend for space. The only thing I remember that is, it's, you ever wondered how would you handle poverty? How would you handle poverty? Most of us are do okay. We got food at home. You know, we got a car. We got a nice roof over our house. But how would we deal with abject poverty? You know, the Depression era. I ever mentioned my friends, the Broughtons, how Mary talked about during the Depression when all the men in the family lost their jobs, and brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws and outlaws and in-laws all moved into one big army tent. 4 families and then a few extras, strays, and they cooked outside, they slept inside, they divided up with curtains, and for the next year and a half or two, the men went out and got what they could, potato or an apple, and brought it back, and they divided up. How would you deal with that kind of poverty? But here's the question here. How would you deal with prosperity? I mean real prosperity. You know, could we keep the same humble spirit, the same giving spirit, and the same trust and the same faith? Would it be safe to say that folks sometimes have a little more faith when they're poor than when they do when they're wealthy? Because you have to rely on the Lord and maybe driven to trust Him. Well, they didn't deal well with it. That's what we're going to come to. There's a strife. There's a contention for the water. Contention becomes so great, Abraham said, let there not be strife between our families. An inability to coincide. And don't think that's a strange thing that these stories are in the scriptures between that. Don't think it's strange. There's as many churches that split over prosperity as they did over poverty. In poverty, they knew they didn't have anything, and they all loved each other and would meet where they could. When they got prosperous, they couldn't even decide over the same hymn books or the same color carpet. It's an amazing thing, you know. The strife for the pasture and water. I would like to remind Lot, here's our simple lessons as we go along. It won't be long. Don't forget where your bread is buttered. Tammy hears me says, they forgot where their bread is buttered. You know, I mentioned about something like it. Don't forget, Lot, you came out of your homeland with Abram, and God's blessings were to Abram, and God blessed Abram, and you rode on his coattails. Don't cause no trouble, Lot. You know. Learn to say, thank you, Abraham. What you want me to do? I'll back my fellows off while you get some water. I'm just throwing that out there for now. But Abraham's graciousness, as some say, may be. Abraham said a lot, let there be no strife. I'm reading verse 8, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen. Since he included him and Abraham and Lot, it seemed like it arose to that level. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. I'm not going to strain more than might be said there, but it seems to be reversed for Abraham said, no, we're going to settle here and you can go there. But he lets Lot make the choice. And Lot's choice, I don't know that it's greed. I don't know that it's just pure business. I don't know if it's selfishness, but Lot looks towards the best of the land. It's compared to the garden of the Lord, and it's compared to the most fertile region of Egypt. Everybody knows about it. And Lot said, I'll take that. And maybe that is the surface of Lot's selfishness or his business decision. But in Luke chapter 17, when I said why so much of this is given in this nighttime situation that's coming, and Lot, because it's use in prophecy. And before we even hardly read about it, as it was as it was in the days of Sodom, verse 28. Likewise, also as it was in the days of Lot. Now it says Lot's day. Isn't it something that's called that? I'll chase something there. I don't want to. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. Very successful, very prosperous, or life as usual. The normal things you think would be taking place. The comparison as it would be as it was in the days of Noah obviously has to be as the days of Noah were so corrupt that God said he had to destroy, he repented and he made man. That's the obvious connection. People are going about their life, but their life is corrupt. People are going about their life, but their life is unrighteous. People are going about their life and they think it's normal. It's the normalcy of a corrupt era. I share that with us tonight. Get a little speaking here going. In the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. An unrighteous, as Noah and Lot, an unrighteous and ungodly, grievous time of darkness, but completely normal to people. How about that? Completely normal. In that day, he which shall be upon that house, this is the suddenness and this is the rapid judgment of God that falls. And yet, likewise, return not back. When it happens with God's judgment, don't go back in the house, don't go back to, like I've said before, and grab your bug out bag and say, well, let's get all things together. He said, when God's judgment falls, it'll be just like it was in Sodom. The idea to get out, but with that, likewise not return back. That famous verse, remember Lot's wife. Lot's wife, she was already out of town. She'd already been rescued by the angels. They'd been warned not to turn back. And the idea of that verse, and she turned back and looked back, was the idea she'd made a decision to return. I read that from those that know the Greek. She's going back. And like I've said before, why? You see what's that? Because the judgment of God is falling fire. But Sodom was her home, and Sodom was her kids, and Sodom was her life. So that kind of adds to the normalcy of when people get too attached to this world. So the rapture of the church, or if the Lord would even lead us out slow, if the Lord didn't take us quickly, I wonder how many people say, but I wonder if he didn't do it in a moment of twinkling an eye. I wonder how many people say, well, let me go back and talk to my family, It'd be that quick. So sharing that with us. Lot, does this have to do with a continual progression? He lifted up his eyes and pitched his tent that direction as he moved in those plains. Genesis chapter 19. The story continues in Genesis 18 and Genesis 19. The angels come to visit Abraham and give him the reason they're on their way to Sodom and Gomorrah. So we have chapter 13, chapter 18, chapter 19, all about this. So it must be significant as it is in the coming of the day of the Lord. And then chapter 19, verse 1. And there came two angels to Sodom at even, we'd say evening, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, arose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Now he knows they're angels. How quick he recognized this is obviously before he tries to protect them in the house and make a hideous offer, but he knows they're angels, and he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and they did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Verse 4, but before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round about, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. We don't want to greet the people who come to town. The Bible's a very cordial word on the word no. And Abraham knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bare a son. It's talking about a sexual relationship. And Joseph knew her not till she brought forth her firstborn son. He didn't have a physical sexual relationship with her before she brought forth Jesus. So we realize this. That's what their pursuit is. And then angrily they beseech the door. The angels pull Lot back in, and they strike the men of the city, about the city, with a blindness as they grope about the door. But it's not before that Lot made the offer in verse 8. Behold, now I have two daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as good as in your eyes. Only to these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. And I'm not going to beseech it on make a gap and then set up a full-fledged military campaign against this issue tonight. I'll just say this. Boy, what a change in Lot. He's been rescued by Abraham once. I mean, he got prosperous by Abraham. He's given a choice where to go by Abraham. He was rescued by Abraham once, and Abraham used 300 men of his house and got him back out of captivity and set him back up, allowed him back up again. And now we find him sitting in the gate. I know in the scriptures at the gate, Absalom stole the hearts of the people. It was a place where you greeted, meet people. It was a place where the gate had the military garrison of cities. The gate had the judicial system of the city where judging. The gate had the economic leaders of the city for the trading of money and for folk coming in the market. The gate was a place of authority. There's Lot. He's obviously with his wealth, he's obviously with his family, become a predominant figure of the city. And I'm going to think probably mostly in the business. That's what I think. But there he is, maybe even judicial. But he knows them angels can't stay on the street at night. Why? Because he knows Sodom. He knew from the very beginning. He knows Sodom, and that's where he made his living. Talk about adapting to the culture. I'll say this: which would you choose? Which would you choose? When the men of the city pressed upon the house, and like a mob trying to have the angels come out. They're in the form of men. They're angels. Did Lot make the offer of his daughters to be given because his morals had gone so low? Or did Lot have now, since the Bible says in Peter, he vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their ungodly living? I mean, he annoyed, he irritated. It was a grievance. Lot's listed as a believer in his righteous soul, but the way he'd been living, and when here two holy angels come, that now all of a sudden Lot become confronted with the holiness of God, and because of that, he's willing to offer up his daughters. It just shows you. But as we come in this thing where the culture drift, and the last days be like Sodom, can even the righteous become so adapted to the culture they'll make some of the most foolish surrender of their morals and foolish surrender of their values. I repeated it said from last week, America, and what we know now of America just in our lifetime, and I don't even want to say our lifetime, my childhood and teenage years weren't even close to what it is now. Mine, let alone Mom and Dad and Grandma and Grandpa. We didn't have the technology. I mean, you remember, in my lifetime, we first got our first black and white TV. And then we got a color console, and you did everything you could to get a picture from two stations, And then we got a rotary. And next thing you know, and now we got TVs that fill up the whole side of a wall and wireless transmission. We got computers and phones and stuff. Not just the technological advances, but the change. I was in 9th grade at West Milton High School when they got on the intercom and said, tomorrow will begin the beginning of the official abdication of our dress code. I forget the exact words, but the dress code is no longer in effect. We went from a public school where we had to dress like this without the tie. That's right, look at the yearbooks. All the senior graduations, they looked like engineers from IBM, haircuts back. We went from that to hippies the next day. I mean, the next day. And girls hanging on fellas in the hallways, and the haze of blue smoke coming out of bathrooms, and tires screeching, and cars selling drugs in the parking lot. We went from this one day to that the next, just like that. And this is something how all those engineer boys, they come to school and their hair is instantly down here and everywhere else, out there. Well, TV had a lot to do with that. But if anybody said, we saw two boys kissing, we'd go, what? You gotta be kidding. Ooh, So that's kind of light on a heavy passage here. But it's just not me. You say, that's a preacher, in a small class on Wednesday. It's just not me. Tammy's dad said the same thing. He said, Tammy's dad said the exact words. He said, I never thought I'd see this. Never saw the thing is. It's to be said of the older generation. If you'd brought back some folks from 50 or 100 years ago and took them for a day's trip around anywhere, any city in this country, they'd roll over in their grave. Jeremiah, I put it up, there's his book, I never thought I'd see the day. I know more could be said about it. The 9 chapter titles are When Atheists Would Be So Angry, When Christians Wouldn't Know They Were in a War, When Jesus Would Be So Profaned. Man, just look what the captain of the women's soccer team said about Christians. I hope there's a special place in hell for them if there is such a thing. when marriage would be obsolete. I could add to that, not just what we think of marriage being obsolete, it's just that kids have no interest in being married, and so few, and you can walk through stores and very seldom see an expectant mother, and or a family, 2 or 3. It's becoming a rarity. And marriage ages went past 18 and 19 and 20 and 1 and 24 and 27 and 28. Now the average marriage is like 30, 32. When morality would be in a free fall, when the Bible would be marginalized, when the church would be irrelevant, when the Muslim state could intimidate the entire world. But it's the introduction is what I read, and he said, when did this slow drift in the wrong direction become? And I put it this way, getting used to the dark. Somewhere along the line, we pitched our tent toward Sodom, then moved into the city, and then became life as usual in the city. And we have Christians sitting in the gate. Now, it still annoys our soul. What's about us? And as mentioned Sunday morning, this is the first Super Bowl held in Las Vegas. If they'd have brought that up even 12 years ago, they'd stayed away from Las Vegas like the plague. Why? Because it comes associated with gambling. And when gambling infests a sport like it did boxing, before long, it will corrupt. There was a major sportscaster who not only did not go, he made a public statement he would not go for any of the interviews or pregame show. Joe Buck. He said nothing good will come out of it being in Las Vegas. How about that? Well, because there's as much money gambled on the game as there was involved in the game's revenues, what it made. Oh, just like they say, absolute power corrupts, and corrupts absolutely. When money becomes involved and billions of dollars become involved, corruption comes. But why is it held there now? Why is there gambling on everything, in every sport, and everything? Why? Because we're getting used to it. We're getting used to the dark. And that's not new with me. I just read this and close our service tonight. In the nighttime, and I believe that we live in the nighttime. I believe we find ourselves Christians in a world that thinks it's normal. And so I'll see if I can get a point or two with Brother Mark here, if I can quote a poem that I remember from years ago, so I was able to look it up. It was from Emily Dickinson. Is that how you say it? The title, it says it all. Growing accustomed to the dark. We grow accustomed to the dark when light is put away, as when the neighbor holds the lamp to witness her goodbye. A moment we uncertain step for newness of the night, then fit our vision to the dark and meet the road erect. And so of larger darknesses, those evenings of the brain when not a moon disclose a sign or star come out within, the bravest grope a little and sometime hit a tree, directly in the forehead, but as they learn to see, either the darkness alters or something in the sight adjusts itself to midnight and life steps almost straight. Something changes. Either darkness or our vision. And she said, we grow accustomed to the dark and we begin to walk in it. We get used to it. Isn't that something? I use that tonight as a lesson in the night seasons. Proverbs said, walk in the ways of the Lord, in the ways of his righteousness. It's the light. The way of the unrighteousness is the dark. We'll continue on with some night season lessons I think you'll enjoy, as I've enjoyed. For your goodness we're grateful. In Jesus' name, amen. Here's what I'll say.